Ladies and gentlemen, welcome along to Too Many Games. Today we continue in our video series in Epic Armageddon, and we will be exploring some special rules that apply around shooting, namely Overwatch and Crossfire. If you are interested in Epic Armageddon, then I suggest you check out the other videos that I've released so far going over the rules and how to play. So let's get stuck in. Overwatch. What is Overwatch? Overwatch is a way that a formation or part of a formation is allowed to shoot outside its normal turn sequence in response to an enemy's movement. Imagine a unit defending a location, weapons ready, waiting for the enemy to move into their line of fire, ready to shoot them as they do so. So a unit can declare their action to be an Overwatch action. This does mean that on their turn, when they declare this action, they may not move or shoot at all. Instead, you mark the formation as being on Overwatch. Use a counter or a token or some other way to represent that this is the case. However, you can only go on Overwatch if the formation is in a legal formation at the start of their activation, namely that all units are within the standard 5 centimeter distance from each other. So how do we then use this Overwatch condition? A unit that is on Overwatch may choose to shoot at an enemy formation after it completes a move or if it unloads troops. So in response to a move or in response to troops disembarking from a transport. This Overwatch shooting occurs immediately before the enemy can shoot or assault after their move. It essentially interrupts their action. If a formation has taken an action with multiple moves, Overwatch can trigger after any of those moves. So we have an example here of a unit of Space Marines on Overwatch with a unit of Orc Boys nearby. Let's say the Orc Boys declare a march action. They move once towards the Space Marines. This would be a valid opportunity to trigger the Overwatch and to fire at them. They move a second time. This would also be a valid opportunity to interrupt if they hadn't on the first one. They then move a third time, and once again, this would be fine to trigger Overwatch and fire here. So continuing on with Overwatch, there are a few things of note. It's important to note that any formation on Overwatch is only able to respond with a shooting attack when an enemy moves or unloads troops. No other action will ever trigger Overwatch. So for example, if a formation declares a sustained fire action and shoots at you, you cannot then trigger your Overwatch to fire back in response to their shooting. Furthermore, a formation on Overwatch cannot target a formation that did not trigger their ability to shoot. So you can't respond to one formation's movement by shooting at an entirely different formation. And lastly, any shooting that you perform as a response to Overwatch is still subject to all the normal shooting rules. For example would be cover or line of fire or range. So when does Overwatch end for a unit then? Formation will remain on Overwatch until one of two things happens. Firstly, if it shoots, so it uses its Overwatch to declare a target in response to a move that they've done. Or secondly, it takes a new action in the following turn. So Overwatch obviously then can last from turn to turn. And as a result, a formation doesn't have to shoot on the turn that it goes into Overwatch. In fact, it could go onto Overwatch as the very last action that any formation performs on a turn, giving it no possibility to fire, but lets it set up for the next turn in advance. So to reiterate on that, they may go onto Overwatch one turn and actually end up firing on Overwatch in the next turn. But there's something to note about this if it happens. If a formation does end up shooting on the following turn due to Overwatch, then that shooting will actually count as their action for the turn. This means that you can't shoot as a result of Overwatch and then activate that unit again for that turn and have a second round of shooting or any other action for that matter. So there's no doubling up on firing in that case. Also, if the unit has not shot during that following turn, it can activate as normal and it can choose its action accordingly. It can go back onto Overwatch or it can do something completely different. Let's have a look at some FAQs that come up for Overwatch. So firstly, can a formation on Overwatch use its Overwatch fire when it is not a legal formation? And the answer is yes. The requirement to be a legal formation is only when the formation is taking an Overwatch action. However, it could it could not choose to remain on Overwatch, as it would have to move back into legal formation. So the need to be in a legal formation with units no further than 5 centimeters away from each other does not impact the actual use of your Overwatch. It only affects the formation when they are trying to take an action, such as Overwatch. Okay, next up, can a formation on Overwatch use its Overwatch fire when it is in the zone of control of an enemy formation? And the answer is yes, as it is not taking an action when shooting while on Overwatch. However, it could not choose to remain on Overwatch, as it would have to charge the enemy or leave its zone of control. So once again, a very similar question to the last one, just asked being in an illegal position of sorts. Does it stop the use of Overwatch? And it's more like the action phase of for the formation is when you sort everything out to make sure everything's legal. But during the turn, when it's not their action, they're allowed to be in those awkward positions and still use their Overwatch. Okay, let's keep moving on these FAQs. A formation carries out an action that involves a move, but none of the units physically move. Is it still susceptible to Overwatch? So essentially, does a move of 0 centimeters trigger Overwatch? And the answer is yes. Any action that includes one or more moves, so advance, engage, double, march, and possibly marshal, hold, and special actions, is considered a move for the purposes of Overwatch, even if units moved 0 centimeters. Note that withdrawals and consolidation moves are optional, however, and that a player can choose not to move the formation at all, thus avoiding Overwatch. So we have a distinction between optional moves and moves that are part of an action being taken. So withdrawals and consolidation moves, we'll see more on them soon, and not mandatory, so you don't have to take them. Technically, that's different from taking an advance action, say, and just deciding to move 0 centimeters. Okay, in the spirit of FAQs, here's some more. Do units that enter play via a special rule, such as landing, planetfall, self-planetfall, teleporting, tunneling, being summoned or swarmed, trigger Overwatch fire? No, only completing a move or disembarking triggers Overwatch. So special ways of entering the board do not count as a move, technically, so no Overwatch is triggered in that case. Next, an air assault suffers Overwatch fire when a transported formation disembarks, which formation receives the blast marker for coming under fire? The disembarking formation, as it triggered the Overwatch. So again, this is a rule we'll get to one day, but probably not that soon. It's an aircraft dropping troops into assault, basically, and the distinction is drawn that the actual troops coming out are what actually causes the Overwatch to trigger. So therefore, they are the ones that take the blast marker, as they are two different formations: the vehicle that dropped them off, and the unit the formation that's getting out. Okay, another question. A commander orders a second formation to follow their formation in an assault. They count as a single formation when making an engage move and take Overwatch fire. Which formation receives the blast marker for coming under fire? And the answer to that is the formation that was closest to the enemy Overwatch formation. This question may benefit from a reread once you've gone over the assault rules, and maybe even the commander special rule as well. It's a strange ruling, but ends up being how it has to be played. Essentially, multiple units are charging at the enemy together, and the way to work out who takes the blast marker, because they all count as one formation when they're charging in, is just to give it to the closest formation to the people shooting on Overwatch. And the reason that I can see why they would rule it like this is that one of the formations has to take it, and the closest one is going to be the one that takes the hits first, as we've seen in our shooting rules for allocating hits. Next up, does a countercharge move trigger Overwatch fire? And very simply, no. Again, this happens in assault, and we will see all that, but it's a different type of move, and it's led to the ruling that no, you don't trigger any Overwatch off a countercharge. Okay, we're on the home stretch with these questions. What happens to a formation that is broken from Overwatch fire while it is carrying out an action? So referring to the situation where Overwatch will cause enough blast markers to break the unit during its turn. And the answer is a bit of a reference here. See 1.13.3, it makes a withdrawal and loses the rest of its action. Basically, when a unit breaks on its own turn, it loses the rest of its action. It's quite a disheartening experience for the player, and you might experience that one day. And then it follows the rules for withdrawing and breaking as referred to in the rule book. So yeah, it just basically loses the rest of the turn and is broken and has to withdraw. Do formations on Overwatch need to take an action test to remain on Overwatch? Yes. However, if all the unactivated formations you have left are on Overwatch, you can declare that they are all remaining on Overwatch without an action test. Even if they are not a legal formation, in enemy zone of control, have blast markers, etc. Effectively ending your part in the action phase. So again, this is an interesting one here. The answer is yes, you do have to take an action test to go back onto Overwatch if you're currently on it and you activate that unit. However, the situation that is allowed, that is mentioned here, lets you break those rules. So when all you have left is unactivated units that are currently on Overwatch, you can avoid taking that action test by declaring that all of those units will stay on Overwatch once again. So you get to have it for free, so to speak. The benefit for your opponent in that, I suppose, is essentially you'll have your turn ended because you can't do anything else for the rest of that turn apart from maybe trigger those Overwatches. It is a bit of a corner case, and you know I haven't actually seen that happen in a game, but it's interesting for far more defensive lists and situations in a game. Not to mention, this does apply if you only have one unit that's left that's unactivated, so that might be the time that you actually do that. And interesting to note here that you can declare they are all remaining on Overwatch, even though they could be breaking the rules as far as the formation being not within 5 centimeters or being in a zone of control, or having the blast markers making it more difficult. So it does let you exploit some of those rules that would cause you to not go on Overwatch if you activated normally. So one to keep in mind, but again, probably not something you're using every game, I would imagine. Okay, let's move on to the second topic for the video today, and that is Crossfire. Crossfire is a rule that comes up in a situation where you've probably outmaneuvered your opponent, and thankfully this rule encourages you to do so. Crossfire represents the units or formations rather being shot at in the flank or rear, where perhaps they are more susceptible, or perhaps representing they've been caught off guard by your actions. So how do you get this? Because it's not just a case of being next to a unit or behind a unit. You can claim Crossfire if you can draw a straight line of up to 45 centimeters from any shooting unit to another friendly unit, and this line crosses an enemy unit in the target formation, or the space between two enemy units in the formation. And so what does this mean? Well, if you can draw a line from one of the units that is shooting to a friendly unit somewhere, essentially on the other side of the target, and that line has to be 45 centimeters or less. So from one of the people shooting to another unit, and that line that you draw crosses over the enemy unit that you're shooting at, or in between two of those units that you're shooting at, so still crosses that space that they occupy, then that is when you've caught them in a crossfire, because you've got two units essentially on differing sides of the opponent, helping you get a crossfire. Let's see an example of that, just so we can picture that. Firstly, we have this Predator tank facing off against a unit of Orc boys, and there is a friendly Space Marine tactical squad on the other side of the boys, as you can see. The Predator tank opens fire, and now because you can draw a straight line from the Predator tank to the tactical squad, then this counts as a crossfire as long as that line is 45 centimeters or less. And it represents that the Orcs here are caught in a crossfire, being attacked on multiple sides. Our second example is similar, but now there are two Orc boy units facing off against the tank. Once again, the Predator tank opens fire on them. And now we see that this line that is drawn to the tactical squad is, as long as it's 45 centimeters or less, doesn't cross over any of the units directly, but it crosses over an imaginary line between the two Orc Boy units. So that space that they are occupying. So it crosses that line. So therefore, the boys are also caught in a crossfire here. Okay, so there's a couple of considerations to take into account for a crossfire. Firstly, the unit that you draw the line to, so not the shooting unit, but the friendly unit that you have that's helping with the crossfire, must have a line of fire to the target. So they can't be on the other side of a building or a hill or something with no vision to the target. However, they don't have to be, they don't have to have range to the target, is what I'm trying to say. It might seem weird, but remember, this is only a 45 centimeter line, so generally we're talking about really small distances here. But range is not a consideration for that second unit that's helping out. They just need to have line of fire. Secondly, you cannot use broken or marching units to help with a crossfire. Why is that? Well, this stops those cheeky plays that aren't really the result of clever outthinking of your opponent in terms of tactics. So you can only use units from formations that are not broken, or formations that have done an action other than march, so haven't done that triple move to get into position, or they haven't done an action yet on the turn either, so that's also a fair situation. So now we've discussed how to get crossfire. What does it actually do? What does it give you? So firstly, the target formation receives a reduction in their armor save. This is really good. A modifier of -1 is applied to all results they roll on their armor saves for that attack. This would mean that a unit with a strong 4+ save now needs to roll a 5+ to achieve their save. It's a very good bonus to have and can't be understated. Secondly, the first casualty suffered in a crossfire attack causes 2 blast markers instead of just 1. So this is the first casualty, the first death, the first unit removed. It's not the blast marker that you get for being shot at. So it does require that somebody is actually killed. But basically it will lead to an additional blast marker in total on the unit. So that's not bad at all either. So these are the 2 bonuses that you get from crossfire. However, be aware, sometimes there are certain pieces of terrain or special rules that can negate your bonuses. So just be careful to consider that when trying to get a crossfire. Off the top of my head, I think fortifications fit into this category, and I know the thick rear armor special rule also has some effect on crossfire, but essentially every attack that can claim crossfire will receive these bonuses to the attack, and they're pretty powerful. Okay, so let's finish up crossfire with a few questions about how it interacts with other parts of the game. So firstly, does the friendly unit need to shoot at the same target formation in order to be used to catch it in a crossfire? And the answer is no. So the unit you draw your line to, the friendly unit, to claim the crossfire, doesn't have to do anything in order to help out. There's no obligation for them to shoot at that unit when they have a chance. They could move away if they want. I mean, they could even march away because they've already provided the crossfire help. They just have to be there, they have to be not broken, and they have to have not marched before you do that crossfire on that turn. Along with having line of fire and being within 45 centimeters of the attacker, obviously. Okay, next question. Does the friendly unit need to have a weapon that can affect the target formation in order to be used to catch it in a crossfire? No, it doesn't need weapons at all, or even a firefight value. So this is an interesting question, or rather answer, about the type of weapons needed from the supporting unit. And it is quite interesting because they don't need weapons at all, it seems. So I'm assuming that this does 2 things. Firstly, it gives you something to do with a unit that perhaps has used maybe a single shot weapon, or it's a transport or something similar. So it gives you a purpose for those units. They can still provide a role in the battle. And secondly, it represents that the act of a unit being in your flank or rear is enough to cause the target unit to be unnerved, about the idea of being outflanked, even if they're not obviously a ranged threat to them. Okay, some more questions. Does the shooting formation need to have line of fire to the friendly unit? So does that supporting unit in the crossfire need to be visible to the attacking unit? And thankfully the answer is no. Both the shooting formation and the friendly unit only need line of fire to the target formation. So that's a good thing. Okay, next, does the -1 save modifier apply to cover saves? Yes, it does. So not only does Crossfire help with armor saves being reduced, but it also affects cover saves. And this is a big one to remember. And it can help you when dealing with lightly armored or even unarmored troops or units that are perhaps held up in a building and getting a 4+ cover save. It makes them quite strong, but there are ways around that, and Crossfire is a great way to just drop that save down a little to help you deal with them. Okay, let's do an example of Crossfire with a few units to represent it all. Okay, so here we have a formation of Predator tanks facing off against a formation that contains 3 stands of Orc boys. There are 3 formations supporting them to try and get the Crossfire. So let's imagine that the Predator tanks open fire against the boys. Now let's look at each of these formations that can possibly support. So we've got A, B, and C. All here ready to help. Now A is within 45 centimeters of the predators. Now it might just be out of line of fire of the predator tanks due to the terrain that's blocking it. As you can see, perhaps that's a forest there. But remember, that doesn't matter, as it clearly has line of fire itself to the boys on either side of that terrain. It doesn't need to be seen by the actual predator tank. And it's within 45 centimeters as said, so a line drawn from the predators either crosses one of the units or crosses that space in between 2 of the units. So the Crossfire here, the bonuses would apply from formation A being able to support. Now formation B with the bikes is a bit clearer and a bit easier to see. They have line of fire to the boys, so they qualify on that one. However, the distance between them and the predators is over 45 centimeters. So unfortunately, they cannot support the predators in a crossfire attack. Lastly, with formation C, we've got drawn in here, not necessarily that well. They are within 45 centimeters of the predator unit. So they fit the bill on that requirement. However, if you have this red block of terrain in front of them there, it's actually obscuring the boys from their line of fire. So this means that they cannot lend their support for the purposes of crossfire in this case. So even though all these formations and units are nearby the action, only one of them, if you have a look at that final diagram there, can actually support in crossfire. That said, having more than one unit support is not necessary and doesn't add any additional bonuses, so the Predator tanks will benefit from the reduced armor save of their target, including cover saves, and the bonus blast marker for the first casualty they cause, if they cause one. Well, it looks like we've come to the end of another video in our Epic Armageddon series. I hope you enjoyed the discussion and the explanation of both Overwatch and Crossfire rules for Epic. They are powerful weapons to have in your arsenal, so to make your shooting just a little bit more potent, you just have to use your units and your formations well in order to see them help you. The next video in the series is going to look at the assault phase, and this will be big. So unlike the shooting video I did, which was pretty mammoth, I've decided that I'll split this into 2 parts, and they might both be mammoth anyway. So keep your eyes open for that. Feel free to like or subscribe if you want to see the rest of this series, and I'll try and respond to any comments that you might leave as well. See you next time on Too Many Games.